Here is our first story called Rough Patch. On a Saturday afternoon in mid-September 2022, 28-year-old Lily Lindsay flopped down onto her hotel bed in Dubai, feeling ready for a nap. She and her boyfriend Brian had spent the morning at an extravagant brunch buffet at a nearby hotel. They were visiting Dubai from their home in Scotland and had been looking forward to the hotel brunch all week. It was an endless array of food, craft cocktails, and live cooking stations. By the time she and Brian had left, they were full and totally exhausted. Lily yawned and took out her phone and began absent-mindedly scrolling through her pictures from the past few days. She couldn't help but smile as she flipped through all the photos. Lily was not a vain person, but she had to admit she looked good. In the lead-up to their vacation, Lily had been eating well and exercising. Then, in August, she'd gotten some dental work done to correct her asymmetrical smile. Like most kids, Lily's adult teeth came in a bit crooked. She got in braces when she was a teenager, but the dentist had overcorrected, and as a result, her front teeth had always been a bit off-center. Lily had been a bit self-conscious about it, but never enough to get major dental work done. However, a few months ago, one of her friends had fixed their uneven teeth with veneers that went right over the front of each tooth like a shell. Most veneers are made from porcelain, but these were a new kind made from the same material the dentist used for cavity fillings, which made them about 10 times cheaper, and they looked just as good. And so, after doing some research, Lily began to save up for the veneers herself, and she premiered her new teeth a few weeks before this vacation at her best friend's engagement party. She had received a ton of compliments and had never felt more confident in her smile. Now, flipping through her pictures in their Dubai hotel room, it was clear that the money and effort had all been worth it. Lily got up and went to the bathroom to wash her face. Even though they'd only been in Dubai for a week, she already had a hint of a suntan. Her skin was glowing, except for 2 small red patches just beneath her eyes. They had appeared a couple days before she and Brian had left on their trip, but they weren't itchy or sensitive, so she decided not to worry about them. She figured it was most likely just a weird breakout that would clear up on its own. A month later, in October of 2022, Lily was back home in Scotland, rummaging through her bedroom closet. She pulled out some arts and crafts supplies, the at-home gel manicure set she'd used during COVID, and then finally found what she was looking for: a black bedsheet. She wrapped it around herself, then pulled a silver mask over her face. Then she took a look in the bedroom mirror. It wasn't the best Halloween costume she'd ever put together, but it would have to do. Lily had planned to be a desperate housewife like the rest of her friends going to the party. But she had decided to invent a costume instead. She wanted to wear something that would hide her face, because now it was completely covered in painful red rashes. After she came home from Dubai, those 2 patches beneath her eyes had not gone away on their own. Instead, they began to get worse and swell. And then the skin around her eyes also got red and very wrinkly looking. In the mornings, the skin on her face felt so tight and swollen that it was painful to open her eyes. And then once she started blinking and moving around, her eyes would itch and water. She had to rub at them all the time, which only further irritated the skin. And on top of that, her lips were super dry and cracked. At first, she thought all of this was just some sort of allergic reaction, like hay fever, and went to see a doctor. But he said she most likely had perioral dermatitis, a form of rosacea that can cause a red, sometimes scaly rash around the mouth, nose, and eyes. The doctor prescribed a low dose of hydrocortisone cream and a rosacea cream to help with the swelling. He also told her to stay away from a common ingredient in cosmetics and cleaning supplies called sodium lauryl sulfate, which can make the rosacea worse. Finally, he told her to try over-the-counter antihistamines to help with her itchy, watery eyes. Following this appointment, at first, Lily's eyes cleared up, and within a week, her skin was back to normal. But then, the red patches came back with a vengeance and spread over her entire face. She had no idea what was causing the breakout, but she told the doctor that the first rashes had appeared right after she had gotten her new teeth at the end of the summer. It was also around the time that she had changed her diet and exercise routine for Dubai, and so she wondered if one of those things had triggered the rashes. But her doctor assured her that veneers and healthy foods and exercise wouldn't have caused this skin condition. But until they figured out the real culprit, Lily knew she'd be attending costume parties as a makeshift silver-faced ghost. 6 weeks later, on an evening in December, Lily sat in a restaurant with friends, feeling stressed. She scanned the menu, searching for a food item she could actually eat. Since that Halloween party, her rashes had spread even further. Now her entire body was covered in red patches that were so inflamed it hurt to shower. And some days, the flare-ups under her arms were so painful she could barely put her arms down. Lily's doctor still didn't know what was causing her condition. He wanted to test her for scary diseases like lupus, a chronic disease that can seriously damage many parts of the body. However, before she took that step, Lily went to see a dermatologist, and they actually diagnosed her with eczema. This diagnosis made sense. Lily had eczema as a toddler, and the dermatologist told her that it could come back later in life, and usually when it did, it was much worse than before. And so the dermatologist prescribed her moisturizers to clear up the rashes. However, the creams only made the rashes worse. Lily tried every moisturizer on the market, and none of them seemed to help. And so the dermatologist suggested they do an allergy test, thinking that maybe Lily was exposing herself to some chemical that was causing her skin to break out. However, this test presented a problem. They couldn't test Lily's skin while it was inflamed because the rashes would cause false positives. So they had to get her skin cleared up for a full 2 months before administering the allergy test. That meant a big lifestyle change for Lily. First, she had to use a steroid cream to clear her skin, which was something she was kind of nervous about using. It was slowly working, but Lily didn't like using the cream all the time because steroids have downsides. In this case, this type of cream can cause rosacea, skin thinning, and even fungal infections. Plus, if she took even 1 day off from the steroid cream, her rashes would come back within hours, and they would sting so badly she'd want to claw her skin off. So, Lily also spent a month doing elimination diets, cutting out different foods that were known to make eczema flare up. For the past few weeks, she'd been eliminating dairy products, which made it difficult to enjoy a night out with friends. Almost everything at restaurants is cooked in butter, which is dairy. And so when the server came to the table, Lily glumly ordered a salad. These days, Lily was in pain all the time, which made it hard for her to leave the house. But she still had to get up and go to work most days. Her managers did not understand the seriousness of her condition and wouldn't let her work from home, even when she had a flare-up. And on top of everything else, her best friend was getting married in June, and Lily was the maid of honor. She had to plan a bridal shower and a bachelorette party in Spain, but she felt too distracted by her skin condition to focus on the wedding. She couldn't help but feel like she was letting everybody down. And so Lily decided to make another doctor's appointment, but this time it was with a mental health professional. Years ago, she'd taken a low dose of antidepressants to help her cope with anxiety. She decided it was time to go back on them, at least until she felt like herself again. 2 months later, in early February of 2023, Lily sat on an examination table while her dermatologist taped more than 200 small round patches to her back. These were allergy test strips, and each of the little bubbles contained a different allergen. Lily just hoped that one of them was the cause of her eczema. But if she was being honest with herself, Lily was feeling a bit disappointed. She'd asked the dermatologist to test whether she was allergic to a key ingredient in her veneers called acrylic, but he had said no. Lily's first doctor had assured her that acrylic veneers would not have caused her skin condition, but some part of her still wondered if they were to blame, since the rash began right after she got her veneers. She pointed this out to her new dermatologist, but he said the same thing. An allergy to the filling material in her veneers, which is acrylic-based, was basically impossible. People do develop allergies to acrylics, but only through repeated exposure to acrylic chemicals. Lily didn't live or work in that kind of environment, so an acrylic allergy test would basically be a waste of time. By the time her dermatologist was done, Lily's back looked like it had been bubble wrapped, and the strips on her back were already beginning to itch. She had more than 200 chemical samples on her skin. She was bound to be allergic to at least a few of them. The dermatologist reminded Lily that she had to leave these patches on all weekend. She nodded, already dreading the discomfort she knew the next few days would bring. But she told herself that if she could just push through to Monday, she'd have an answer. She would know what was causing her eczema, and maybe this nightmare would finally be over. The following Wednesday, Lily walked into her dermatologist's office for the third time in less than a week. She'd gotten the allergy patches removed on Monday morning, after suffering through the most miserable weekend of her life. The entire patch test had irritated her skin, and several of the patches actually burned. Plus, she hadn't been allowed to shower with the patches on her back, which made her feel grimy and even more uncomfortable. The only thing that made the weekend bearable was her boyfriend Brian, who had come home with an ice cream maker to help distract Lily from the pain. They'd spent Saturday making peach sorbet and binging Real Housewives. And so now, her dermatologist would hopefully know what was causing her excruciating eczema. The doctor told Lily to hop onto the examination table so he could take a look at her back. Since Monday, most of the irritation had cleared up, leaving only a couple of sore spots. Those were the positive allergens, and then told Lily he had good news. He'd identified about 10 allergens for her to avoid. Lily was thrilled until he handed her the list of allergens. It included lavender oil and a handful of other chemicals commonly used in cosmetic creams and serums. But Lily never used lavender oil, and it had been months since she put any kind of cream or serum on her skin. There was no way her eczema was being triggered by any of these chemicals. She realized the allergy test had basically been a painful waste of time. Lily was furious as she drove home. Her eczema was still out of control, and none of the creams she'd been prescribed were working. The elimination diet had done nothing to help. The steroid cream was only a short-term solution, and if she didn't figure out what was causing her eczema soon, she was going to be patchy and in pain for her best friend's bachelorette party and wedding. Lily felt like she knew something happened last August to trigger this eczema. There was no other explanation. But every doctor she talked to had told her that her veneer theory was wrong. It was maddening. However, Lily was ready to trust her gut on this and take matters into her own hands. In late April 2023, Dr. Camilla Campbell felt worried as she walked into her next appointment. 8 months ago, she'd given her patient, Lily, a beautiful set of veneers. And now, Lily was insisting on having them removed. Several weeks earlier, Lily came in for a consultation, absolutely convinced that she was allergic to her new teeth. She said her mom had watched a morning talk show segment about people who developed an allergy to acrylics after using at-home gel nail kits. Lily realized she had used those exact nail kits repeatedly during the COVID pandemic, and so she was now certain that that had made her allergic to her acrylic-based teeth. Dr. Campbell had tried her best to talk Lily out of this procedure of having her veneers removed. The doctor had consulted multiple other dentists around Scotland, and all of them agreed with her. There was no way Lily's teeth were causing such extreme eczema. But Lily had been insistent. The teeth were coming off. Dr. Campbell walked into the room and greeted Lily, who was already waiting in her dentist chair. She told Lily they'd be using a gum shield for the procedure. On the off chance Lily really was severely allergic to the veneers, Dr. Campbell worried that when she began grinding them off of her, the dust from her teeth could send her into anaphylactic shock. Dr. Campbell asked Lily one more time if she really wanted to go through with this, but Lily nodded her head. She was resolved. So Dr. Campbell fired up her drill. A few weeks later, Lily and the other bachelorettes reached the departure gate for their flight to Spain. Her best friend told everyone to gather around for a photo. Lily leaned in and smiled brightly, because for the first time in nearly a year, her face was completely clear. All this time, Lily had been right. She was allergic to her veneers. During COVID quarantine, she had passed the time doing her nails with an at-home gel manicure kit that contained acrylic, just like her veneers. She had bought a cheaper kit just to save money, not realizing that there were some chemicals in the gel nail polish that could be harmful. And over time, repeated exposure to those chemicals gave her an allergy to acrylics. They caused a massive allergic reaction. However, once the veneers were removed, the eczema almost entirely cleared up. Lily still has to be careful with her skin, because while eczema is no longer affecting her face, she still struggles with occasional red patches on her body. Plus, her skin is more sensitive. For her best friend's wedding, she decided not to get a facial or spray tan with the rest of the bachelorettes. She didn't want to chance a flare-up before the wedding. She doesn't know why her eczema has not gone away entirely, but she's working with a new doctor to try and figure that out. Lily shared her story with People magazine in the hopes of spreading awareness about acrylic allergies. While these allergies are certainly rare, they can be damaging and painful to treat. She believes that dental offices should test for these allergies before using them on a patient. But most importantly, Lily is relieved to feel like herself again, and she hopes her skin will stay clear for another upcoming wedding. She and Brian got engaged in January of 2024 and hope to get married towards the end of 2025. Here is our second and final story called No Warning. On the morning of August 15th, 2020, 16-year-old Rohan Gadhania stood in his kitchen mixing up a protein shake. He was trying to put on some muscle before school started in a few weeks. Rohan took a sip and grimaced. The shake was thick and chalky, which he just was not expecting because he did not often drink protein shakes. But Rohan was never one to back down from a challenge, so he adjusted his glasses and steeled himself, then gulped the whole shake down. When he was done, he slammed the glass down on the counter in triumph. He told himself he was going to learn to like those shakes because he was going to get jacked. Rohan put the dirty glass in the dishwasher, then bounded up the stairs to his bedroom on the second floor, already feeling stronger. In truth, he was a very skinny kid, especially for his age. And even though Rohan knew he had a lot going for him, good grades, a bright future, a very winning personality, he really wanted big muscles, or at least to weigh more than a 12-year-old. Rohan opened the door to his bedroom and made a beeline for his piano keyboard. Rohan was a very accomplished musician and loved practicing just about every day. But this morning, he stopped himself and instead turned toward the Nintendo Wii game system hooked up to the television on top of his dresser. He grabbed the Wii remote and began browsing through Wii Fit games until he came to strength training. Rohan thought that if he started right now and kept on sucking down those protein shakes, maybe he really could build some actual muscle by the time classes resumed. At lunchtime, Rohan's father, Hitendra, made sandwiches for the two of them and then called Rohan to the kitchen table. But while Hitendra wolfed his meal down in about 4 bites, he noticed that his son barely touched his food. Rohan told him his stomach hurt, and Hitendra just nodded, understanding. He told his son it was fine if he didn't want to finish his lunch, and encouraged Rohan to go lie down and take a nap. Hopefully that would settle his stomach. Rohan smiled at his father and then left the kitchen. Once the boy was gone, Hitendra picked up Rohan's plate and began to tidy up. But then he heard the distinct sound of dry heaving coming from the upstairs bathroom. Hitendra dropped the plates into the sink and hurried upstairs to check on Rohan, who he found kneeling over the toilet. Rohan retched repeatedly as his father rubbed his back reassuringly. Then Hitendra suggested Rohan stay in bed for the rest of the day. It seemed like he must have picked up some kind of stomach bug. Once Rohan was in his bed with a waste can nearby just in case, Hitendra went back downstairs and found the protein powder he'd gotten for Rohan. It was the only unusual thing Rohan had eaten over the past couple of days, and Hitendra wondered if it had gone bad or had some strange ingredients in it. Hitendra scanned the label, and he saw the expiration date was not for a while, and none of the ingredients stood out to him as unusual or alarming, so he shrugged and put the protein powder back where it went in the cupboard, convinced his son would feel better by morning. But when Hitendra went to check on Rohan the next morning, the boy was as white as a sheet. Rohan admitted he'd vomited a few times overnight, and that he felt even worse than the day before. The boy propped himself up in bed, squinting. Hitendra thought his son might be looking for his glasses, so Hitendra told Rohan they were on the nightstand. Rohan nodded slowly, but then he started looking around the room as if he didn't know where to find his own nightstand. Hitendra frowned and just pointed at the nightstand, and Rohan's face suddenly lit up as though he was pleasantly surprised to even find a table there. Now, Hitendra couldn't help but feel more concern for his son. He wondered if Rohan was so dehydrated that he was confused. So he helped Rohan downstairs and sat him at the kitchen table while he went to grab a bottle of the sports drink they always kept in the pantry. But when Hitendra returned to the kitchen carrying his son's drink, his son suddenly seemed even stranger. Rohan glared at his father with utter contempt. When Hitendra asked if everything was okay, Rohan snapped that his father should mind his own business. Then Rohan got up so aggressively that the table shook. Then Rohan just stood there staring icily at his father. This was very unlike Rohan, and so Hitendra knew something had to be deeply wrong. Rohan was so gentle normally, but now he was erratic and aggressive and confused. Hitendra knew his son needed to see a doctor, but something told him it was just not safe to try to take Rohan to the hospital by himself right now, like not in this state, something was terribly wrong. So to play it very safe, Hitendra just called an ambulance. A few hours later, Rohan's mother, Pushpa, arrived at West Middlesex Hospital, where the paramedics had taken her son. She kept telling herself that Rohan would be just fine, but Pushpa still felt incredibly anxious as she entered the hospital lobby. Her husband, Hitendra, met her in the hallway outside of Rohan's room and explained that Rohan had become increasingly agitated on his way to the hospital and he kept trying to get up and move around the ambulance on the way, and Hitendra actually had to physically restrain him on the stretcher to keep him from jumping out the back doors. Pushpa just blinked in surprise at this incredibly strange turn of events. Rohan was just not the type of boy to fly into a rage, let alone leap out of a moving vehicle, and so fear began creeping into Pushpa's mind, much the way it had already creeped into Hitendra's mind. And so Pushpa followed Hitendra into Rohan's hospital room, hoping to find Rohan back to himself and feeling better. But instead, Rohan was sitting up in bed, hunched over a kidney-shaped bowl and vomiting. Pushpa felt instant sympathy for her son as she watched him throw up, but that wasn't the worst of it. There were tubes hooked up to Rohan's arms, and wires patched to his chest, leading to all sorts of whirring and beeping machines. Whatever was wrong with Rohan was clearly more serious than just the flu or some other minor ailment. Pushpa looked back at Hitendra, whose eyes were full of concern. Hitendra explained that Rohan had been deteriorating ever since they arrived at the hospital, and the doctors still had no idea what was making Rohan sick. Rohan was complaining of intense abdominal pain and kept forgetting where he was or how he'd even gotten there. Suddenly, the knot in Pushpa's chest tightened and her breathing quickened as she grappled with what Hitendra was saying. And so, kind of panicking, she just stepped out into the hallway and let out a scream of absolute despair. Her son was falling apart before her eyes, and there wasn't anything she could do. She felt so hopeless. Pushpa bent over and braced her hands on her knees, sucking in long breaths of air. When she finally felt like she had collected herself, she went back into the hospital room and planted a kiss on Rohan's forehead. She told her son everything was going to be fine, even though inside she didn't know that. Then she stood next to Hitendra, gripping his hand tightly. Over the next few hours, Pushpa and Hitendra paced the hospital room as their son alternated between moments of confusion and extreme agitation. All the while, doctors and nurses came in and out, explaining all the tests and treatments they were doing to try to figure out what was wrong. The doctors said that they suspected that Rohan was suffering from some kind of inflammation around the spinal column and brain, and so they started him on medication right away for the two most likely conditions, which were meningitis and encephalopathy. For a little while, Rohan did seem to get better with the medication. But just before midnight, he started to get restless and agitated again, and he began trying to jump out of the bed, which would have torn out all the wires and IV lines. And so Hitendra did his best to hold the teenager down, while Pushpa repeatedly pressed the call button for help. A moment later, two nurses were in Rohan's room, attaching restraints to Rohan's wrists so that he couldn't get out of bed. A doctor said that Rohan was getting too unstable to remain in a regular hospital room, and he directed the nurses to move him to the intensive care unit. Pushpa was shocked. She knew Rohan was sick, but she still couldn't believe his condition had gotten this bad, and so she had to fight to hold in another scream. The nurse said that Rohan would be sedated once he got upstairs, and he would likely be asleep for hours. She urged Pushpa and Hitendra to go home for the night and then come back rested in the morning. Pushpa hated the idea of leaving her son, but she also knew that he'd be under close watch in the ICU without them. And if Rohan was going to be in the hospital for a few days, she and Hitendra would need some sleep. So they followed the medical team to the ICU, and they stayed with their son until he fell asleep, and then after kissing their boy goodnight, the parents headed home. When they got there, Pushpa threw on some pajamas and crawled into bed, but she felt like she was not going to be able to sleep. She just stared at the ceiling, thinking of her son, and she would lay there, her thoughts racing, until about 5 a.m., when her phone started ringing. It was the hospital. The doctor explained that Rohan's condition had actually taken another serious turn for the worse over the night. Rohan was now struggling so hard to breathe that he had to be intubated and put on a ventilator, which meant that a machine was now keeping him alive. Absolutely shocked and terrified, Pushpa shook Hitendra awake, and then she ran to wake up their 17-year-old daughter, Alicia, and then the three of them threw on their shoes and raced to the hospital. By the time they arrived, Rohan's doctor was there to meet them. The doctor admitted that they were struggling to get Rohan stabilized, but he was not actually in immediate danger. Once he was stable, they planned to do another CT scan so they'd have a better picture of what was going on in his brain. Pushpa felt like she was going to faint, so she sank into one of the chairs that lined the pale blue hallway of the ICU. She was vaguely aware that Hitendra and Alicia had sat down on either side of her, and each had taken one of her hands. After the doctor left, Hitendra squeezed Pushpa's hand and reminded her that while all of this sounded terrifying, Rohan was in good hands here. Pushpa wanted to believe that, but the drumbeat of bad news over and over and over again was making it hard for her to be optimistic. Pushpa sat tensely by Rohan's bed for the entire day, willing her boy to get better. Rohan's doctor came to check in every few hours, assuring them that Rohan would get his CT scan once he was stable enough. And then finally, in the late afternoon, technicians were able to perform that CT scan of Rohan's brain. And then, around 6 p.m., Rohan's doctor slowly walked into his room, staring at the floor. The doctor took a deep breath and looked Pushpa in the eye. He told her that Rohan had severe swelling in his brain, which can be fatal if it's not controlled. The doctor said he had already called the neurosurgery department at nearby Charing Cross Hospital, but the team there had said they could not, in good conscience, operate on Rohan to relieve the pressure. Given the extent of his brain injury and meningitis, they were not confident he would survive the surgery. Pushpa struggled to understand what the doctor was even saying, that essentially her son was too far gone to help. She hadn't even considered this possibility. Her boy was only 16 years old. Despite all her worry over the past few days, she had fully believed her son would eventually get better. He had to. Pushpa told the doctor he had to be wrong, but the look on the man's face said everything. Her boy was beyond helping. The following evening, on August 18th, Pushpa sat on the edge of Rohan's bed, her hand wrapped around his. Rohan lay motionless, still intubated and hooked up to IVs and machines. Hitendra and Rohan's sister, Alicia, sat nervously on the other side of Rohan's bed. Rohan's doctor was leaning over him, essentially checking the teen for signs of life. He stood and slowly turned to Pushpa and her family. He looked truly sad as he said that Rohan showed no brain activity. Then he said he would give them time to say their goodbyes, and he left the room. Pushpa stroked her son's hand, still unable to accept what was happening. Alicia tucked a teddy bear under Rohan's arms. He'd had it since he was a baby, and still slept with it every night in the corner of his bed. The whole family knew he'd want his bear to be with him now. For the rest of the afternoon, the family sat in silence as they struggled to say goodbye to Rohan. And then finally, at 5:03 p.m., Rohan passed away, and Pushpa's heart shattered. But her family did not get much time to grieve, only a few minutes. A doctor entered the room and asked Pushpa and Hitendra to consider donating Rohan's organs. He apologized for how quickly they'd need to make this decision, but organs need to be harvested for transplant as soon after death as possible. The doctor knew it was small consolation, but he said that Rohan's death could very likely save other lives. The doctor then held out some lengthy forms. The idea of filling out paperwork in the same hour that her young son died was repulsive to Pushpa. But she understood, and she knew what decision Rohan would have made. And so she and Hitendra took the forms and agreed to donate Rohan's organs. A few weeks later, Pushpa sat in Rohan's bedroom back at their home outside of London, holding his teddy bear to her chest. It was the only one of his belongings that she'd touched since her son had died. The grief of losing a child was almost more than she could bear, and since his death, something else had really been eating at her. Pushpa still didn't even know what had made Rohan sick. And because they had donated his organs, there hadn't been time to conduct an autopsy. And so she was really struggling to accept that she'd just never learned what had killed him. Pushpa worried that if what had killed Rohan was something genetic or environmental, his sister Alicia might also be at risk. But more than anything, she wanted to know if something could have been done to save Rohan. It just felt like this huge question mark was looming over her family's head, occupying every waking thought. 13 months after Rohan's death, so in September of 2021, Hitendra ignored Pushpa's running commentary on his wild driving as he weaved in and out of traffic. They were on the way home from Alicia's university. They'd just finished moving her into the dorms for the fall semester, which felt even more bittersweet than Hitendra had anticipated. He and Pushpa were empty nesters now, but only because Rohan was gone. Hitendra did not want to go home and cook a dinner for just 2 people. He was about to bring up the possibility of maybe going out to a restaurant when Pushpa's phone rang. It was an unknown number, but for some reason, the hair on the back of Hitendra's neck pricked up, and he told Pushpa to please answer it. And so Pushpa did, and she connected her phone to the car speaker so they could both listen. The man on the other line sounded grim. He explained that he was from the National Health Service blood and transplant team, the people who harvested their son's organs for transplant. Hitendra exchanged a quick, surprised glance with Pushpa as this man went on. The man said they needed Pushpa and Hitendra to come into the office for an urgent meeting. Hitendra was confused, but offered to drive straight to the office. They could be there within the hour. The man said that would be great and thanked them. Hitendra felt more curious than alarmed, so he pushed the gas pedal a bit faster as Pushpa reset the GPS to their new destination. What Pushpa and Hitendra learned at this meeting absolutely shocked them. The National Health Service team member explained that the recipient of Rohan's liver had become gravely ill earlier that year. A biopsy on the liver that had come from Rohan revealed a very dangerous condition with a very complicated name. It's called ornithine transcarbamylase deficiency, or OTCD for short. OTCD is a genetic condition that prevents the body from breaking down ammonia, which can cause the toxic chemical to build up to lethal levels in the bloodstream. The man explained that the recipient of Rohan's liver didn't have OTCD before his transplant surgery, so the illness had to come from the donated liver, Rohan's liver. And so the team member told the parents that their son almost certainly suffered from OTCD. Finally, 13 months after Rohan had passed away, his parents knew what had actually killed him. Pushpa and Hitendra stared at each other in disbelief. They were relieved to get some answers, but they didn't know anything about OTCD and why it would have suddenly killed Rohan like that, and so they asked for more information. The NHS team member explained that some people with OTCD don't even know they have it because the disease is inactive. However, the illness can be triggered by a big dose of protein. And in Rohan's case, he had drank a huge protein shake on the morning he got sick. He'd never consumed so much protein before so quickly, and his body basically couldn't handle it, and so that's what prompted him to get sick. Pushpa and Hitendra were obviously devastated. If they'd only known about Rohan's kind of inactive condition, they would have never let him drink protein shakes like that. Now, could that have forever prevented him from getting the disease? They don't know. But certainly, that protein shake is what prompted it. Thankfully, though, it does not seem likely that their daughter has OTCD, which affects an estimated 1,000 people in the United Kingdom alone. More studies are being conducted on OTCD, but as far as we know, it is extremely dangerous, killing about 50% of infants diagnosed with it at birth, and around 10% of people diagnosed with it when they're 16 or older, which was Rohan's age. However, there were no warnings that the protein powder that Rohan ingested could trigger this terrible disease. Rohan's experience ultimately prompted calls for new warnings to be printed on all supermarket-bought protein shakes in the UK. Hey Prime members, you can listen to new episodes of MrBallen's Medical Mysteries early and ad-free on Amazon Music. Download the app today. And also, Wondery Plus subscribers can listen to MrBallen's Medical Mysteries ad-free. Join Wondery Plus today. Before you go, tell us about yourself by completing a short survey at listenersurvey.com.